bien, estamos en un nuevo episodio de el TOCcast el día de hoy. Estamos con un gran invitado desde el Reino Unido. Estamos con Stuart de The OCD Stories. Stuart tiene un podcast que se llama The OCD Stories, probablemente el podcast anglosajón en idioma inglés más grande sobre TOC. Así que vamos a conversar con él sobre su experiencia con el podcast. Él también es psicólogo y se dedica al trabajo con pacientes TOC. Nos va a contar toda su historia junto a sus entrevistados, lo que ha aprendido en todo este proceso. Y luego vamos a invitarlo, por supuesto, a un nuevo episodio de el TOCcast. Voy a cambiar ahora al inglés para que podamos hacer la entrevista con Stuart. Hey Stuart, how are you? Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm sure what you just said was all wonderful and good.
Ah, yes. Everything was just wonderful.
Good.
So don't
Okay.
worry.
Okay.
Hey Stuart, so I was telling our audience that you created a podcast called the OCD Stories, right? And I said that it's probably the biggest platform or podcast about OCD for English speaking language. So before we go into the podcast itself, I will really love, and I think the audience will really love to know you a little bit more. So just a very open question. So who you are, and then why were you interested in treating OCD and talking about the OCD community?
Yeah. So as you said, my name is Stuart Ralph. I live in England, in the south of England in particular. And yes, I've been doing the podcast since 2015, so 7 years, I believe. Since where will it? Yeah, it might even be 8 this December. Yeah,
Wow.
I lose track of time, but I'm now a child and adolescent counselor and psychotherapist. I work with about 60-70% of my cases are people with OCD. And then I keep about 30% non-OCD, just for a bit of variety.
Yeah,
And it helps me with OCD, right? Because everyone with OCD has other stuff going on too.
exactly.
Yeah, true. So, but I wasn't always a therapist. I started the podcast. Had a business background, and I had my own OCD journey and story, and that's what led me to creating the podcast and then retraining as a therapist. But yeah, so I'll give you the shortened version of my story. So it started when I was about 7. I was in the USA. Disney World or Disneyland. I get the two mixed up. One of those. Yeah. So yeah, I was 7, and I just remember being in like a diner, so like a Wendy's or a Denny's. It was one of those two.
Oh,
And I was with my mum and my brother. My dad was in the hotel room because we'd landed that day, and he was sick. I think either like airplane food, jet lag. I'm not sure. It wasn't anything serious. He was just feeling under the weather, so he stayed in the hotel room. And I just remember while I was sitting eating with my mum and my brother, getting these intrusive images like constantly coming to me. And I remember at the time I didn't know it was anxiety because I didn't have that word in my vocabulary. But now I look back, it was very much anxiety. And there was this feeling of doom that if I don't, well, what I was seeing in my mind was a tarantula kind of crawling up my dad as he laid there, and it was going to bite him, eat him, whatever it is. And yeah, and I just remember thinking, I need to say something. If I don't say something, we're going to get back to the hotel room and he's going to be dead. I didn't say anything. I don't know why. But yeah, we got back. He wasn't dead. So as far as I know, he hadn't been bitten by a tarantula. I now know in retrospect that at a young age, at 7 or 6, I had seen the horror movie Arachnophobia. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how I watched it. I shouldn't have been allowed to watch it. And and what's ironic, I went back to watch it recently because I thought, I'm going to get over this. I'm going to deal with this fear. So I watched the movie, and while I did it, I did breathing exercises and grounded myself and didn't look away, any of the sort of safety behaviors to try and face that fear. And it was tough, and I got through it. But what I realized about 30 minutes into the movie, my intrusive image of a spider crawling up my dad and going to bite him is exactly what happened in the movie about 30 minutes in.
Yeah.
So my brain had seen that and warped it and turned it into my dad. And then there were other stuff on that holiday. And I don't know why it suddenly came out in America and not when I was in the UK, but maybe America's quite big, at least. So when I say America, obviously I mean USA. It's the cities are massive, the roads are big. Maybe that was overwhelming for me.
Everything is new, everything's different.
Exactly.
Changing times, and
That's true.
it's probably like, I don't remember who said this, but maybe OCD is like a perfect storm, and if you have like the right genes, the right learning stories, and then like the right I don't know, stress conditions, then I don't know, I relate to it because it's what happened to me as well. So, but anyway, this
with the
story,
spider one.
no, with
Okay.
other themes of OCD.
Okay. Yeah.
I had my own spiders, but they were more like human.
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really
Yeah.
like spiders though. I mean, I could do some exposure with spiders. I should try.
But that's partly why I watched that film again. I was like, this could be an exposure. And you know what, after watching that film and making sure I wasn't compulsing and I was, breathing to calm myself and ground myself and all that, now I see a spider and it doesn't really, I don't feel like my fight or flight kicking in or anything like that. I mean, I would if I saw a tarantula, obviously I'd get pretty anxious.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
like how
huge.
spiders in the UK, they're as far as I'm aware, they're not venomous or dangerous in any way. So they're harmless. They're just
nothing can kill you in the UK.
no, no, we don't really. I'm trying to think. No, we have stags, so the deer with the big antlers. If you get close to them, they'll ram you, but they won't kill you. It will just hurt like hell. Yeah. But there's nothing too deadly in the UK. And then it just kind of morphed from there. In my early childhood, there was lots of going back and forth over like doorways until it felt right. Lots of tapping, counting, again with this feeling of it feeling right. And I'd also get this weird one I still can't explain to this day, but I have heard it in others. It's if I don't do this thing in just the right way, I'll still be sort of with my family, but I won't really be with them. It's almost like I'll be in a different dimension. It's really weird to describe. And then sometimes it would be, if I don't, whatever it is, tap a certain amount of times, someone in Africa is going to die or starve or, so an early form of harm OCD. And I do remember when I was about 9 or 10, like getting really stuck crossing this doorway back and forth and being really anxious and sort of crying. And my parents were downstairs watching TV. And I just remember thinking, this can't be normal. Like this can't be right. Like others can't be experiencing this. So that was my first time I really thought something's not right here. But again, I didn't really say anything. And then in my 20s, it was like relationship OCD, real event OCD, harm OCD still a little bit, and lots of contamination fears around sort of STIs, sexually transmitted diseases and stuff. And then I got therapy in my late 20s, and that was pretty good. I still see a therapist now, but not so much for OCD, more for other stuff, processing that. But yeah, that was a real squished, condensed version of my story, but it gives you kind of a taste.
Totally. And maybe we can zoom in just a little bit on some elements related to OCD. So you mentioned you had like different themes, and it looks like themes for you were changing quite a lot. That's true for a lot of people, and it can be quite annoying, especially when you're in treatment and you think, okay, I'm done with this. I can deal with this. I'm no longer afraid with this. Then OCD tends to change themes. I guess I want to ask you, when you do therapy and your clients say, but what if I have another content? What if I get obsessed with my partner, or I get obsessed with being schizophrenic? Like, when is this going to end? How do you relate to that? What's the message you give them?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think, sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat at the minute, so I might clear my throat occasionally. So
me too. Like
okay,
everyone I know in Chile is having a cold right now. So
yeah, same here. So it's obviously going around the world. So yeah, I mean, I've definitely fallen into the trap as a therapist of, especially with the clients, their themes like change almost weekly. They might have 5 themes, and they kind of, one week they're focused on one. So then when you come to do the ERP on one, and they're not even bothered by that now, they're focusing on the one they're currently obsessed with, that can be really tricky. And I definitely have got pulled in of like following the theme as opposed to just staying focused on the plan. So that's for me personally as a therapist, but I would kind of say that to the client of, I notice we're kind of flip-flopping here. We're going from one thing to another. Remember, the OCD is what's behind the theme. The theme's not really that important. It's kind of like a mask, I tell them, that's kind of, it's a scary thing that puts on a mask to scare you, and then next week it will use a different mask, and we need to tackle whatever that is behind that mask. And then do our best to stay focused on one theme at a time. And what I find is, as I get people up to speed, I can start doing exposures across multiple themes, and that comes in from like inhibitory learning. So I found that quite good, but only when people will really like get it and they're doing it. And but I think also that's where like acceptance and commitment therapy comes in. So keep practicing those skills so that whatever comes up in the moment, we can just go back to the ACT skills, like dropping anchor or urge surfing, as a way of dealing with it. Well, we almost to diffuse or detach from that content, that theme. Like, again, we don't need to be getting involved in this. We don't need to think about it. Let's come back to the moment or breath, whatever it is.
The present. Yeah. So we have a lot of OCD community listening to the podcast, also professionals, and even those might not know really what is inhibitory learning and the difference with habituation and emotional processing. So it would be awesome if you can like teach us a little bit of the difference in the approach of doing ERP.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely do my best. I don't know if academically I can give a really detailed answer, but yeah, habituation was the original way of, or the original theory of why we thought ERP worked. And, inhibitory learning came along, and I'll explain what that is in a second. And I don't think it doesn't necessarily disprove habituation. It's just another theory, right? And when I do therapy, I sometimes talk about the difference between the two, but I often just draw it out on graphs, and I'll say like, and what's happening here is, as the sort of anxiety comes down, I might say your body or brain is getting used to that stimulus, which might be habituation, or your brain is learning something new. So, which is obviously inhibitory learning. So habituation is through repeated exposure over time, you habituate, you get used to the fear, the stimulus, and then your brain starts to calm down, or learn. Well, this then somewhat falls, learns that it's okay. whereas inhibitory learning is similar, but it's learning new information that sort of trumps or beats the old learned information. And I think both are perfectly okay. I think the to use, but I think the main difference with inhibitory learning, the main goal is we see a reduction in anxiety. Now, with inhibitory learning, they say it doesn't really matter in session whether your anxiety goes down or not. The argument is your brain's still learning new information. So I like that. That is the one thing I like definitely talk about more, because, you know, if we're doing ERP with someone and they're doing exposure, they're being brave, but their anxiety is as high as it was when they started it, they're going to go away feeling like it didn't work. And not only didn't it work, I'm now triggered, you know, 8, 9, 10 on the SUD scale. Whereas if you say to them, you can somewhat reassure them in a non-OCD sense of it's okay that it didn't go down. Your brain is learning in the background. And sometimes it takes longer than the session for our anxiety to reduce. And I mean, that's where it links back into ACT. We don't, it's not really about symptom reduction. It's about learning to make space and be okay with the thoughts and feelings and live your life anyway. And of course, as you do that, the thoughts and feelings then come down eventually. But if we focus on, am I still anxious? That's going to keep us anxious. But yeah, there's a few other things, like Michelle Krask, I think it is, who did inhibitory learning. In one of her papers, she wrote down the key differences and what to look out for. One of them was doing exposures in many different settings to help the brain generalize and get used to it. So not just holding a knife in the therapy room, for example. If you have harm OCD, you know, use knives in the kitchen at home, use knives in the garden if that's possible. I don't know. You know, like or, just get in cafes, restaurants, bars.
Leave the knife in your bedroom, like next to your bed all night. Things like that.
Absolutely. And yeah, and then what was the other one that comes? Yeah, that's what I said earlier about the different themes and treating the different themes. Inhibitory learning, I believe, advise from memory. So sometimes with a client, if I've been working them for a while, let's say they've got contamination fears, they've got harm fears, and then they've got tech fears, like technology fears. So like they worry about being recorded via their phone, or is their phone listening to them? Or so, you know, one client I have in mind, sometimes I'd be like, right, I'm gonna, obviously with their permission and get them to agree, but you know, I put my phone on the counter next to me and I just hit record on the voice memo. So that's triggering them in one way because they don't want to be recorded. Obviously they've given me permission, but the OCD doesn't want them to be recorded. We've done stuff with a knife before in the room, just having it next to them, because the worry is that they were going to stab me or someone else.
And that was in the same session or different sessions?
Same session. So at the same time.
At the same time.
And then I would, if they're up for it, if you worked with them long enough, I would even maybe sometimes consider bringing in a third if possible. I bring in 2 quite a lot, because it's showing their brain that, oh wow, there's multiple triggers and fears here and I'm managing it all. Whereas sometimes when we do one exposure, we get so focused on that one, whereas almost it messes with the brain a bit if there's 2.
It makes, I guess, the brain recalibrate and make this new learning, as you called it. I really like the metaphor of, like, you have 2 paths, let's say, in your brain. And one path is the compulsion path, and that's like the old learning. And because you go through it all the time, it's like, it's a very clear path. It might even, you can probably get a car on it. And then as you start doing the new learning, the old path is being covered, you know, with leaves and with dust, so you can't really see it more. Still there, but the new learning is like a new highway, hopefully.
Exactly that. Over time that path gets bigger, right? And then you naturally take that new path because it's now bigger than the old one.
Exactly.
Good one. And Yeah, and one thing is, say when I bring in, like, say 2 exposures, I would only do that if both of those exposures, like, we've done them both before, if that
Okay,
makes
yeah.
sense.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
So if it's
Yeah.
if it's a new exposure, or it's like a really big exposure, we're just focused on that. We're not complicating it with more than that. But yeah, if they've done it the last couple of weeks and they did it okay, then I merge the two together to try and add a new element to the brain.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you use, like, I have listened or I have read it in some books, that when you're using like the, let's call it old or more traditional emotional based ERP, Etnafoa and so on,
Yeah.
um, you're doing hierarchies, right?
Mhm.
So you start exposing yourself, the client, and to softer elements, stimuli or obsessions, and then you go up on the ladder.
Yeah.
But in inhibitory learning, I know some therapists who would use something like a bowl or a hat, and they will
Mm.
throw different, exposure
Yeah.
sessions. Do you use something like that so the client doesn't know which exposure will be this session?
Yeah. Yeah. I know, I do like that idea. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, inhibitory learning went much more like a list of ideas versus an actual hierarchy that's ranked on suds level. I don't, yeah, no, those are good ideas. I don't really do those, which
Me
is making
neither,
me think
but
I
I'm
should do it.
thinking,
But
I'm
yeah,
thinking about doing it.
yeah, I mean, it would be, I work with really young children sometimes. So for them, it would be perfect, like having it in a
Ah,
little bowl that each week they can put their hand in, grab one, or um, what I do sometimes is use post-it notes. So as
uh-huh.
we're coming up with ideas, we just get them to put it on the wall when they've done it. And then obviously I take them off the wall and then we just go through the post-it notes. So that's one way. They just pick one of the post-its. What I do most often is I basically do a hierarchy, but
Uh-huh.
it doesn't have any like SUD scale, so 0 to 10 anxiety. It doesn't have any of that. And it's not ranked in order. It's just a list of ideas. And then we'll come to that and be like, which one do you want to do?
Okay.
So it's, yeah, so they pick it. But I just like the list format. It works for my
Yeah.
brain. And yeah.
And if I can ask, I think it will be interesting to know, when you decided to change careers from
Mm.
business. I believe you were doing kind of marketing
Yeah.
work.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was a listener of the OCD Stories from the beginning. I told you.
Yeah. Thank you.
um, you decided to work with with kids and adolescents. Uh, any particular reason? It was just like a feeling, like you knew it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because I always think about this, and sometimes when you meet like a primary school teacher, is it primary for you guys, or like
Yeah,
elementary is what the Americans are
elementary
called?
or primary. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to stop saying Americans because I realize you're American, and your
Yeah,
audience are American.
yeah.
Um,
That can be annoying for South Americans because,
yeah, I bet it is.
yeah, people in the US they call Americans, but what about us? We are
Yeah.
Americans too.
Yeah, you are. You are. I need to be better at, yeah, America, USA. There we go again. Yeah, the
Yeah,
States. Yeah, obviously they call it elementary, but that sort of young age range, or even like nursery schools, what we call in the UK, which is like below the age of 4,
yeah, like
daycare, all
kindergarten,
that's
right?
kindergarten. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, when you think about everyone, whenever I've spoke to people that work in those professions, they'll say, I just love kids. They just adore working with kids and all of that. And I'm like, I don't not love kids, but that's not why I chose to work with them, because
Uh-huh.
ultimately what I'm passionate about is just helping humans get better. I don't really care what their age is.
Yeah.
But I picked working with children and young people because um, I think that's what I needed at that age. I needed someone when
Mm.
I was 7, 10, 12, 15 to help. Um,
Yeah.
so I wanted to, I guess, to be that answer. And also the logical reason I told myself originally was, and I somewhat believe it, but I think it was more emotional than that, which was it's the sensible thing. If we get in early and help people, we save the adult. we save them when they're an adult, then hopefully not going to be as severe or have as many problems, and can live the life the way they want to live it. So that's why I work with children, to almost reduce the amount of adults that are suffering in the future.
That's amazing. To have that motivation is, it's great. So
you work with adults?
I work with adults and adolescents as well. So well, thanks, Stuart, for sharing all this information. I know, like, I like to do the TOCcast like super flexible and open. Like, I'm not a very structured guy, so I,
like me.
Yeah, you're like
I'm
that
not
too.
structured at all.
So I like to jump from one thing to another, and well, I hope the the audience found it useful. So now I wanted to talk more about your work with the OCD stories. It will be great to hear, like, what motivate you. Why did you decide to do it? There was any kind of podcast about OCD before you started this one?
Oh, you there, Matty?
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
I lost connection for a bit.
Yeah, my internet connection was unstable. Yeah, so why or how did you decide to start the OCD stories? How was that journey?
I started it around the worst, well, not the worst point of my OCD. I think the worst point was when I was about 14, but the second worst point was when I was about 26. And I'd already started blogging on my website, Stuart Ralph. What was it? .com? StuartRalph.com. It doesn't have a blog on that website anymore, but I started blogging about my therapy process and what I was learning. And then about 6 months of doing that, I decided I wanted to do a podcast because, I wanted to just, no, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm confusing myself. It's been so long ago. I was doing the blog, but then my story was kind of getting worse. I wasn't getting much better. I was really unhappy. And I just remember sitting on the edge of my bed thinking, this is miserable. I don't really see how this is going to get better. But if I'm suffering, other people might as well benefit from my suffering. That was my view. And then that's when I started the OCD stories, which for the first 2 or 3 months was just, I was collecting people's written stories basically and publishing them. And then about 3 months later, December the 4th or 5th, I started the podcast. And that was, I just wanted to interview, people like yourself, psychologists, therapists, and then eventually started interviewing people with OCD. Because I wanted to share information out there, because therapy obviously can be expensive at times, and especially some of the like really good experts, their rates are like massive. So
Crazy.
I wanted to share that expertise with the world for free. Didn't really expect anyone to listen, and slowly over time it's grown, and I'm really grateful for that. And it's hard work, as I'm sure doing the podcast, but it's rewarding, and it's nice to hear when it affects people in a positive way. And it's interesting for me. I learn a lot from it.
Yeah, that's actually one of my next questions, like how much have you learned? And but before that, I think I really recall to that story, like from a place of sadness, or for a place of no motivation, or thinking that there's no future for me. You started something, you created something in that period. I think that's probably one of the most therapeutic thing someone can do. Like, even in those conditions, you somehow try to go to help others and helping you as well. So do you think starting the podcast as well was part of your recovery?
I think massively, yeah. I think no matter what my week was like, if it was like really, can I swear?
Yeah,
Is
sure.
that,
I
yeah?
like it.
Yeah. Okay, good. If my week was really shit from OCD or anything generally, but OCD especially, I had a purpose. I had said to people pretty much from the first month of doing the podcast, I made a commitment that I will release one every Sunday, and I think have done for 7 years. So that it didn't matter what I felt or my feelings, or I had to get this podcast out. I had to record an episode. I had to publish it, edit it, all that stuff. And that really, in those darker times, kept me going, that
Yeah.
commitment, you know? And I was, especially as people started listening, it wasn't just about me, it was helping others now. And there
Mm.
was that responsibility. And there's do you know Viktor Frankl?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
always say it.
excellent. Nice. So Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, Man's Search for Meaning. It was a great book. Um,
Mm.
and I don't know whether I think I read that before starting the podcast, not like just before, but probably within a couple of years before that. So I don't know whether that was in my head in the background about, I'm suffering right now. I might as well find meaning in this suffering, which
In
is
the
obviously
suffering.
what the whole book's about. So I think that's what I did when I was sitting on my bed and made that choice. Was I was like, okay, I'm suffering. There's nothing I can really do about that at the minute. So let me find meaning in this darkness,
Yeah.
and that meaning gave light and really helped me and allowed me to have hundreds of hour-long conversations with great minds in the therapy
Yeah.
field and people with OCD. I learned just as much from them. And the network I built from it, that's the greatest gift, really, is like,
Yeah.
I've met you now, and that's awesome. And if we're ever in the United States for like a conference or something, it'd be good to meet. And yeah, whenever I go to any of those events, I see all these people, and it's awesome having that
Yeah.
connection and community.
That's amazing. I think the book from Viktor Frankl, its name in Spanish is El hombre en búsqueda de sentido. I don't know if you know any Spanish.
El
No.
hombre, I know that. Yeah,
El hombre,
man, right?
yeah, the man,
Yeah,
exactly.
man. Yeah.
Um, and I remember I did like a post in my Instagram, yeah, like the OCD Instagram that where I share and do psychoeducation. It's one of the phrases that is known to be from Viktor Frankl, and it's something like between the stimuli and the response, there is a gap,
Mm-hmm.
and that gap is a gap of freedom. And the way I see it is like, yeah, between the stimuli that you are receiving from your mind, like obsessions, and your response, compulsions normally,
Mm-hmm.
or avoidance, there is a gap where you can decide differently. And doing a podcast about it is probably something different, creative. And yeah, it makes sense that it helped your journey.
Yeah, exactly. And while I was struggling in those early days, it gave me lots to say on the podcast and share my own experience
Yeah.
um, and figure out questions for the guests. A lot of the time I was asking questions that I needed to know.
Yeah.
It wasn't. Now I still do that, but I also try and think of my audience. What do they need? What are they curious about? But in those early days, it was like, what do I need to know?
Yeah, exactly.
It was good. Yeah.
One of the most common guests in the OCD stories is Dr. Stephen Phillipson, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did you get to know him? Did you write him like, hey, Stephen, do you want to be in my podcast?
Yeah.
Hopefully he will respond, or maybe not. How was that?
A really good question. I honestly can't remember. What I predict happened was I reached out to him. I probably emailed him
Yeah.
because I think I had interviewed Chrissy Hodges before,
Yeah.
Yeah, and Chrissy was a former client or patient of his, so she would have talked about him on my podcast. So maybe that's where I heard it, and she may have said you need to get him on. Either that, or I saw one of his articles online. Yeah, I honestly can't remember, but yeah, I mean, I consider him a friend. He's a great guy, and yeah, he's done, I don't know, 12 episodes maybe on my
Yeah.
podcast, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and very insightful stuff. What have you learned from Dr. Steven with all these 12 episodes? I mean, it's a hard question. I know it's a complicated one,
Yeah.
but it must be, something that you could
Yeah.
synthesize maybe.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind is the word irrelevance.
He uses that
Yeah,
a lot. Yeah.
he does. So he talks about that a lot, around showing your brain irrelevance.
Yeah.
And I like this, and I talk about it with my clients sometimes, because every time we respond with a compulsion, or we do a mental compulsion and we reassure ourselves or anything like that, we're telling our brain is right to be afraid, and our
Mhm.
brain will keep giving us it because it wants to help us.
Mhm.
Whereas if we can respond differently, or show a relevance and be like, yeah, whatever, brain, or thanks, brain, for
Right.
that useless thought, or well, look, there's that weird thought again. All of this is or even he takes it a step further and like kind of agrees with it, but jokingly, like, yeah, of course that bad thing's going to happen. I can't wait for it to happen. I hope it happens in a
Yeah.
minute. That
Yeah.
rarely have I ever met a client that wanted to do that. But I do it for myself personally. If my brain
Yeah.
does, sometimes I'll just go to the extreme, and then my
Yeah.
brain shuts up most of the time.
Yeah.
So I really like irrelevance, just showing your brain this isn't important. Stop telling me about it. But he's just really good at simplifying big concepts. And
Yeah.
yeah, and the other one is we've done a couple podcasts on choice, and he's actually written an article on it. And he just basically talks about the power of choice and the importance of choice, and just making a choice, and not especially with OCD, sometimes getting hooked on what's right, the rights,
Hmm.
even finding a therapist. I've met many people that are like, they spend months deciding which therapist to go to,
Yeah.
um, instead of just making a choice. And if it's the wrong choice, just fire that therapist and get a new one.
Yeah.
Just don't waste your life on so much on choices. So I really like that. And that comes back to what you're saying about Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response.
Yeah.
There's a choice. And I
Exactly.
think, yeah, Philipson's probably influenced by Viktor Frankl as well, I imagine. Actually, I think he
Yeah.
is.
Most
Yeah,
probably.
probably. Yeah.
That's amazing. So you have done how many episodes? Like more than 300 something
Yeah.
episodes?
Yeah. So the one that's going to come out this Sunday will be 396. So almost 400.
396. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congrats, man.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
that's consistency.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't like to think about it.
Why? Because so many time
But
has gone by.
yeah, and just like, I don't know, sometimes if you think about the cost of something, you'll there's a good chance you'll quit it. At least
Yeah.
speaking for me. Whereas if I think, actually, I don't think about how long it's gone on for, or the episodes. I just think, what have I got to do this week to get it live?
Yeah.
And I do that, and then I relax for a couple of days. Now what do I need to do to get it live for next Sunday? So I think week by week, and I think that's why I've been able to be consistent. If I stop to think about, oh, I want to get to 400 episodes, I would
Ah.
never have done that. I would have scared myself. Like,
Yeah.
again, like, I don't know how many more I'm going to do. I don't have a plan to stop at the minute, but
Yeah.
it could be 100 more, it could be 500 more. I don't know. But if I set a goal of hitting 1,000, there's no way I'd get there. I'd scare myself out of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. We're in episode number 11. So we
Awesome.
have we have quite a difference between 389 and 11. But yeah, the same. I think
He's
I'm not
yeah,
sure how many I'm going to do, like
yeah,
maybe 50 or
yeah.
maybe the other day I was thinking maybe someone else would like to do the TOCcast for a while, and then I return, so
Yeah.
giving some
Get a
fresh air
guest.
to the space.
Yeah, I've definitely considered that. I'm just I find it hard to let it go, to be honest. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's like
but
your
no,
it's
but
like your
yeah,
little kid.
exactly. I have had the odd guest host from time to time, and that's been quite good. So, but yeah, 11's good. Like just starting it, it's such a hurdle to start anything like this. So the fact that you've
Yeah,
started it is the main thing, and you're
yeah.
rolling. So
I it was exposure for me as well. Like doing it, telling the audience, I have OCD as well. I had very bad episodes or cycles in my life. Now it's like going, I don't know, not zero, of course, not zero,
yeah,
but it is like, I don't know, a 10% of what it was in the past. Who knows? Maybe we'll go even more down, even more,
yeah,
or maybe not. Like
yeah,
we can't really know that. Um, and I really like what you said about like going. I will use like a soccer or a football metaphor. You guys say football like us.
yeah.
Like
Good.
all the time the players are saying like we focus on the next match and the next match. Like don't ask me about the final. Like I have no idea. It's
Yeah,
just the next match. Um, um I use that metaphor as well with my clients. Like
nice.
don't think about
Yeah.
the how you say that, like the last part, the goal,
The goal. Yeah,
yeah. Let's think more about the journey.
yeah,
How do you talk about that with your clients, about the journey, about not
yeah.
setting goals that are too high, um things like that?
Yeah. I'll often discuss it when, well, yeah, if we set goals, I try and make them manageable. But when it comes to say like homework during the week with ERP, I often have that conversation when they haven't been doing the homework and
Mm,
when they haven't done it repeatedly. And then they're saying OCD is still really bad. And I'm like,
mm,
well, you work hard in session and that's really good. I'm happy about that. But you're only with me for 1 hour a week. You've got however many 100+ hours when I'm not there
yeah.
that you need to be doing the homework we set. And if you do the homework we set, you're dramatically increasing the chances of you getting better.
Mm,
So I have that kind of conversation. I probably do need to bring in some more metaphors in that area.
mm,
One I do like that I don't think I'd ever use with children and young people unless they were religious. But I'm not particularly religious. But one thing there's many things I love in the Bible, but one in particular, uh, which is I think it's the passage, be faithful over few and you'll rule over many.
uh-huh.
Have you ever heard that? I guess it would be
No,
different in
but makes
Spanish,
sense.
but
Makes sense.
yeah. So it's like with the homework, like just be faithful and work really hard over this week's homework. And if
Mm,
you do that and you do that every single week, or another way of saying that is like um, a journey of a journey of a
yeah,
1,000 miles begins with a single step.
step
It's that
exactly.
same thing. Like, yeah, don't worry about the 1,000 miles. Just take the step this week. Next week, take
Yeah,
the other step, and eventually you'll be at that 1,000 miles. So
exactly.
um, it's hard for people, especially teenagers, because their brain discounts the future,
Yeah,
for the present.
the
So it's
pre
hard to
yeah,
get them engaged in doing the work sometimes.
yeah. A deficiency in prefrontal cortex doesn't help
Yeah,
at that
true.
age. But well, yeah, that's amazing, and that's also related to what we were saying about making the decision. Like you have to make a decision to make the first step, and then the next one, and then the next one.
Yeah,
But yeah, I wanted to start like summing up, and
mm,
we're getting to the end of the episode of today. I wanted to ask you another open question, like if you will have maybe not one. If you want, it could be two or three. What would be the main advices for people with OCD? And then, if I can, some advice, one or two, for family, for the loved ones of people with the this mental health disorder.
Yeah. Advice for someone with OCD. Step one is in finding a therapist. Obviously, find someone who knows how to treat OCD, ideally with ERP, but someone that you really get on with. I don't mean as like a friend, but like you just feel safe with them. You feel supported and encouraged, because I feel the therapeutic relationship is really important, and it doesn't get talked about a lot in CBT. But it's such a big area of every other therapy, you know. So yeah, that's one thing. I would say build a community, you know, whether that's support groups. There's tons of support groups online. If you go on the ICF website, they list loads of support groups, and I'm sure there's Spanish speaking groups in there, especially with places like Miami and stuff. Yeah. And yeah, is Puerto Rico Spanish speaking? It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And
Yeah.
actually, there was a BTTI, I
Oh,
guess,
there was.
last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly that. So just finding support groups, I think sometimes that can be really helpful, especially if it's a really good group and you build friendships, or it could be making friends online or forums. Sometimes you've got to be a bit careful, because sometimes people use those places just to seek reassurance and
Yeah.
might be quite negative. But if you find a good group of people, I think it can be really healing. And the other thing I would say, do the research. So like listen to your podcast, mine if they're English speaking, read books. There's so much cheap and free information out there. Especially if you can't access therapy. Like, knowledge is power. Like, consume it, put it into practice. Yeah. And then
And
for
for
families,
yeah.
yeah. So I'm trained in SPACE, which is supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions. Have you come across SPACE before?
No.
Yeah, SPACE came out of Yale in the United States. And I had the guy on my podcast, Ellie Leibowitz. It was basically created for when families of sufferers under 18 wouldn't go to therapy. They wouldn't do CBT. So the families are like, what do we do now? Nothing can happen. So they created this therapy. So the therapist works directly with the parents or the caregivers, whoever it is. Yeah. And they work on reducing accommodations. So not buying the extra shower gel, not opening the door for them, like all of this stuff. And you gradually cut out the accommodations in the same way a sufferer would gradually cut out compulsions. And then you also increase support. So supportive statements, building up that support for the loved one. Like, I can see how hard this is for you, but I know you can handle this. It's statements like that. So I would say check SPACE out. I think it's like spacetreatment.net, but they've written a self-help book for parents, and it takes you through the whole process, almost identical as what I would do as a therapist with parents. So you can do that. And hopefully they've translated that to Spanish. I would assume they have. That's the first thing. I would say get support in the same way there are more like family support groups, you know, and sometimes if there are none or no Spanish ones, for example, like start your own in your local city, town. Try and find ways to build a network, meet other parents. Even if you start with one other parent, go for coffee, share advice, just generally support, because it can be really tough supporting someone with OCD at times. And then again, like really understand OCD, like do the reading, listen to the podcast, really understand OCD. And when you do, it'll be easier to support, or at least understand what's going on for them. And yeah.
So it's like, for families, is reach out, like don't try to do everything by yourself. Like, don't be a superhero, find a community as well, and also try to reduce family accommodation. Maybe not everyone in the podcast know what is family accommodation. Can you help us a little bit understand?
Yeah. Accommodation is basically when you help your loved one do a compulsion. So they might come to you and say, did you wash your hands before cooking chicken, right? In contamination. Now, if they've got OCD, we don't want to answer that question. We don't want to say, yes, of course I washed my hands, because we're reassuring them, and that's making their OCD worse. Instead, what we want to do is say, I can't answer that. That's OCD. Or you can say, I can't answer that. I can see how hard this is for you, but I know you can handle not knowing whether I wash my hands or not. So that's the supportive statement in space, but it's acknowledge their pain or validate their emotions, and then it's respond with confidence, give them confidence that they can handle it, they can process it, deal with it. Accommodations are, a lot of the time it's really subtle. So sometimes I'll speak to parents and they'll be like, we don't really do many accommodations, and then we talk about it and there's like hundreds, but they're just really subtle. So it
has been normalized for years, probably.
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes parents, when they know, when they get to realize that helping their loved one with compulsions was making them worse, they get very sad or very guilty because I was doing so much damage to my kid or loved one. What do you say normally to those parents?
I try and validate that early on, that you did what was the right thing for someone who doesn't have OCD, which is what every parent does. They reassure, they comfort, they help, they love, they do all this stuff. Maybe forget love, because you should do that even with OCD. But the other ones, so you weren't to know that wasn't helping OCD, but now let's do something different. So it's kind of, don't beat yourself up, because you did what a loving parent would do. But now that we know it's OCD, there's a different right now, which is not doing the accommodation so much. And then in time, when the OCD reduces, of course you can do more of that stuff. And actually you can do it all now anyway. You just can't do it in relation to the OCD.
Yeah. Exactly. That's amazing. Well, Stuart, the cough. Has been a real pleasure to share all this time. I really hope we can have another episode in the future and talk about other topics in the OCD world. I really hope we can meet at some point in OCD conference or something like that. Thank you so much again, and thanks to everyone who was listening. If someone wants to listen to the OCD stories, how can they do that?
Spotify, iTunes. I don't know if someone's in Chile, for example, whether through their Spotify they'll see my podcast. Okay, cool. But the easiest way would be just go to the OCDstories.com.
Perfect.
And you'll have all the links there.
You have YouTube as well.
Oh yeah, YouTube. Yeah, true. I forget about that. Thanks for having me. It's been great chatting with you, and thanks to your audience. And muchas gracias.
De nada. Thanks so much, Stuart. All the best, and have a nice weekend.